Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build Monday Night Football Edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We're going to break down the showdown slate at DraftKings for the game between the Jets and the Bills. Pretty big game in the AFC East as the Bills are up top at 3-2, and if the Jets win, they can take over first place. So you wouldn't really know that, judging by the fact that they fired their head coach recently for seemingly no reason. But here we are. It is a big game, and it could be fun. And also a little bit ugly. We're going to break it down for you. And if we help you out in any way, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel so you get alerted to more videos just like this. All right, Taylor, let's start up top in the captain position. We're really going to look at captain first, and then we can go from there. Obviously, Breece Hall, unsurprisingly, is the top play in terms of raw points projection and overall ownership. So let's just talk about him first. It is not bad chalk to eat Breece Hall in the captain slot, in my opinion. He's pulling almost 21% ownership, and that sounds just about right because the Bills are second worst against fantasy running backs in terms of rushing yardage allowed. So yeah, I mean, I love him. I'm assuming you do too. Give your thoughts on Breece Hall.
Yeah, he's been really bad as a Breece Hall dynasty team haver.
Yeah.
He's gotten like 5 points the last 2 weeks combined or something horrible like that, but role's still there. They kind of fell behind last week. That could happen, of course, again. Like the Bills are just probably better than them. So he could get games scripted out, but I think he's a fine play. Cheaper than Josh Allen, cheaper than James Cook, cheaper than Garrett Wilson. So I'm getting to him more than I am to those guys in the captain slot. I think, do you think he's going to be more highly owned than Josh Allen in captain? Even I know ownership says that he is, but do you believe that?
Yeah, I do, because the matchup is really good. And I think with the coaching change, the Jets have kind of been pretty public about the fact that it's like they're just going to run the ball more. They're going to commit to the run. Like you said, Hall has had 19 total carries in the last 2 games. Those were close games. Like, I don't really know. They did fall behind against the Vikings, but the week before he had 10 rushes for 4 yards. That is disgusting. But also, let's keep in mind, Broncos defense 2 weeks ago, they're not an easy matchup. And the Vikings defense, that was in London. So, like, you have a pretty underrated Minnesota team. And then it's like the whole London thing can just make things wonky. So I don't know, man. I think all things considered, they're going to recommit to the ground game. And yeah, I do expect the ownership to be very heavy and just slightly above Allen. But obviously the other guy that you're looking at right away is going to be Josh Allen for sure. So let's talk about Josh Allen too. First of all, though, Breece Hall looks amazing. The only reason why you're getting away from Breece Hall at all is because he's chalky. And you can hang your hat on the recency bias thing to a certain degree. Like, you could say, okay, by the way, he's not top 7 fantasy points in the last 2 games. The coaching change thing could be a major problem. The Bills defense as a whole is not bad. It's just they've given up a lot of rushing production on the ground to running backs. So I like him a lot, but I can definitely understand why some people would want to go away from that ownership. So speaking to that, what are your thoughts on Josh Allen? Even though obviously, I mean, he's facing like one of the best pass defenses in the league. The Jets are literally number 1 against fantasy quarterbacks. So we don't always want to take matchups into effect, like, to maximum level, but the number 1 defense against quarterbacks doesn't sound great. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's not a great passing offense either. Like, they got off to a pretty hot start and they've kind of fallen off since then. I'm going to be taking a pretty heavy stand here. I will be under Allen significantly in the captain. I'll be playing him in flex plenty, but as far as captain goes, he's like the most expensive player on the slate by over $1,000. The matchup, not great, like you said. I'm kind of just going away from this ownership. I don't think he's a good play in captain. I think there's a chance he could be essentially the highest owned captain on the slate with Breece Hall. I would just rather play Hall. Scenario, I think Allen is obviously burning pretty badly, but I will go heavily under the field on Allen captain.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that stance whatsoever, because I think, with Showdown, you do have to take a stand, one way or another. Obviously, the Bills are favored here. I guess in theory they have the more reliable offense. I think my natural instinct is to kind of ride with the Breece chalk, probably in half my lineups, and then slide them over to flex in the other half. Like, I'm going pretty much 100% Breece Hall. I'm going Jets. Like, I'm just going Jets heavy here. I don't really want to play their passing game because it's not like the Bills defense is much friendlier through the air. And obviously Aaron Rodgers, and just like, there's just a disconnect there overall. But overall, I'm leaning Jets for sure. which now brings us to the passing game for New York, and the third guy coming in as far as projection goes, and he's up there as far as projected ownership goes, and he's fairly up there in terms of overall raw points projection too. That is Garrett Wilson. He's coming at 15% ownership in the captain. I mean, based off of last week, I get it, but based off of matchup and the possible schematic changes for the Jets, I don't. So what are you thinking here with that 15% ownership?
I mean, I think part of the schematic change could be just to get him as involved as he was last week. Like 23 targets is insane. He's obviously not doing that again in theory. 13 catches, 23 targets, but he has had at least 6 targets in every game, at least 8 in 4 of the 5 games. So, like the numbers haven't been there. The results weren't great until last week. That was the first time he topped 60 yards. He also scored a touchdown. So, he's still going to be heavily involved. I'm not too concerned about the new coach like phasing him out because that would be a ridiculous thing to do. In terms of captain exposure, I think I'm going to be right around the field on him. I think he's a perfectly fine play. No reason to believe Rodgers shouldn't continue to pepper him with targets. So when it comes to captain exposure, I have more Hall than Wilson, but I like them both.
Yeah, well, I think Garrett Wilson's still fine in the flex. I'm not really drawn to him in the captain because the matchup is not great, and I feel like Breece is probably going to be the way safer option of the two. So if the ownership is only going to be divided by like 5%, I think I'm just going to lean hard into Breece, or try to get like a lot different and then have Breece and or Garrett in my flex spot. So all these guys that we're talking about are totally fine, and they're chalky for a reason. But like you said, we might get away from Josh Allen a little bit because the matchup is pretty brutal, and bless you, he just has not been like, he's had 2 good games out of 5 weeks, 2 amazing games, by the way, 30 plus fantasy points in both games, but his floor has been remarkably low, like surprisingly low. So in the face of a bad or a good defense on the road in a huge game, I don't really anticipate Josh Allen just coming out and dropping 30 plus fantasy points. So I think we can get away with that. On the other side of things, though, this game has a 41.5 point total. 2 solid defenses overall. The Jets are an elite defense, really. And honestly, by the way, Robert Saleh was a very good defensive mind, not so much a great coach. It remains to be seen if the guy replacing him is a good head coach, but he also is a great defensive mind. So I don't think the defense is going to slide whatsoever. So I still think you can tip towards the Jets for sure in that way. Going back to the Bills, another guy that's going to garner ownership almost 10% is going to be James Cook if he's in. I haven't seen any official report. I know that James Cook is questionable. Khalil Shakir is questionable. And I think the other guy that we would want to keep track on is Tyler Conklin, who you normally wouldn't care about, but he has like 6+ targets in like 3 or 4 straight games. So
I care a lot about Tyler Conklin today.
He has a role, man. 6+ targets in 3 straight games, 11 plus fantasy points in 2 of 3. So he's pretty involved. But yeah, let's focus on James Cook. If James Cook is in, what is your interest level?
Not very high, which has burned me on a previous showdown slate this season.
Only every Bills showdown that we've done.
Yeah, I feel like the Bills play nothing but primetime games. Like we've talked about them quite often. For whatever reason, I never get to James Cook. It looks like I'm going to be under on him and captain again this week, and a little bit under in flex. It's not like I'm fading him entirely. I think he's okay, but I think he's a little bit pricey. Like I don't see why he should be more expensive. Isn't he more expensive than Breece Hall? Like that just seems wrong to me. I don't think
he is.
Yeah,
he's 1,000 more expensive than Breece Hall. Well, Breece Hall has been really bad the last 2 weeks, like you said.
Yeah, but I'm not really buying too much into those 2 games. So
no,
this can always burn me horribly, just like the Allen thing. But I think I'm going to be under. I think I'm just playing into the Jet side of it more in general as the underdog, which always seems to be the case on these slates, and it rarely goes right. But in theory, it's the right thing to do. So I'm not getting to Cook in the captain much at all.
I don't want to. If there is a way to attack the Jets, it is on the ground. They're a little bit more vulnerable in that regard. But he's not 100%. So there's always the issue of just being like kind of a decoy and just being like, or limited or re-injured or just not effective, whatever, all across the board. He looks risky at that price. he's had very few like weeks where he missed. He's had 13 plus fantasy points in 4 or 5 games because he keeps scoring touchdowns, which is not really something he used to do. And now this year he is. He's just siphoning Josh Allen production for no real reason. But yeah, I think if he's going to be the 4th highest owned captain, given the ceiling he's displayed, I think we can definitely get to him a little bit more than the field is. But I agree. I don't really want to get there because I am going Jets heavy here. And I'm not really seeing a huge game out of him. I think it's just going to be an ownership thing. If Josh Allen is by far like doubling his ownership in the captain, and there's 3 other dudes who are getting like a ton of the focus, then yeah, we can absolutely look at James Cook a little bit and possibly a little bit more than the field is. But I don't feel great about it. The next tier is, well, actually kind of in a tier on his own is going to be Aaron Rodgers as far as ownership goes. His projection's pretty good. It compares well to James Cook's, and it's just above Garrett Wilson's, which worries me because I am facing Aaron Rodgers with Garrett Wilson in a game where I'm up by 1 point in one of my dynasty leagues. So hopefully it goes my way. But anyways, Aaron Rodgers does not have like a massive ceiling. He's been kind of turnover prone. The pass protection has not been there. And as I said before, the Bills matchup is not exactly one to write home about. So I don't know. I think when you look at 7% ownership, that gets me a little bit interested in him in the captain. So I do think I want to go over that, but I would be lying if I said I felt like amazing about Rodgers, like chances to go off on this game. I think right now I'm going to be a little bit over on Rodgers just because where the ownership is. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like him quite a bit. I think he's going a little bit under-owned in captain. I know he has no rushing upside, so that's something to consider. But in theory, it's a pass-happy game script if they fall behind early, which is obviously possible. He's not as expensive as most of these other high-end options like Hall, Garrett Wilson, Allen, Cook, etc. So you can kind of get more if you do slot him into captain. If I do that, I think I'm playing him with multiple pass catchers because in theory, if he's going to go off enough to warrant being the captain slot in the winning lineup, in theory, a couple of guys are going to thrive with him. So I would probably build that way, but I think I'm going to be a bit over on Rodgers and captain for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. If you want to play devil's advocate, you look back to last week. First of all, Vikings are not an easy draw. And then he did throw 3 interceptions and had a fumble, but he had almost 15 fantasy points despite all those turnovers. And by the way, if you actually watch the game, he got just royally screwed by drops and just bad plays by his guys. So if they can actually resemble real life good football players for a change, then Rodgers might actually look good. I think honestly, a lot of these games where Rodgers' numbers aren't that amazing. You go back and look at it, the pass protection was horrible. Guys are dropping, guys are running the wrong routes. Like it's just, there's a disconnect there. If they can eventually get that going, I think Rodgers is going to start popping off more. And we saw that in week 3 when he had 21 fantasy points. So I'm with you. I'm going to be overweight for sure. I do like him a good deal. I prefer him in flex probably if I had to pick a lane, but as the 5th highest owned captain, that's very, very interesting. So now you got to start thinking, if we are going to go Jets heavy like this, and we don't want to eat the Brees chalk, and we're only going to go a little bit over on Rodgers, where else do we go? Does that send us to Alan Lazard? Does that send us to Tyler Conklin? Does that send us to Braylon Allen? Which of those 3 guys, if we're sticking with Jets, are you most interested in captain or just in general?
Definitely Conklin. Like we kind
Your
of
boy Conklin.
If he plays, the targets have been there. Hasn't scored a touchdown, but it is what it is. He's only 6K in the captain. Like that's just quite cheap given the volume he's gotten lately. I think 6K in the captain. So yeah, I think he's a very strong play, and I don't think he's going to be owned enough in the captain spot. I do think Braylon Allen is interesting. Hall is still playing most of the snaps. I don't know how the coaching change is going to affect that, but Allen's been so productive that I can't imagine they're just going to suddenly just sit him on the bench all night. He's going to have a role of some sort. He's arguably overpriced for what that role may be if he's playing like a third of the snaps or so, but on a showdown slate, I'm willing to take a plunge on a guy like that. 8,100 in the captain's not too cumbersome, and we've seen the explosiveness that he's shown already. So there's upside with him. Yeah, Conklin's my highest owned captain in the entire slate as of now. Hall is 3rd, Allen's 4th so far. So I'm pretty heavy on the Jets and captain.
Yeah, Braylon is a tricky one because I do think they are going to commit to the run more, which is just going to open things up for them quite a bit and like open up their play action and all that and get down the field more. But it's hard to bank on that as far as the ceiling goes. You would think that would be more beneficial for Breece Hall than Braylon Allen. I think Allen is a great flex option. I think you're really rolling the dice if you are hoping for him to be the guy in captain, but I'm not going to say it's not in play because I do think they're going to run the ball more, and I think they're going to run it pretty effectively in this matchup. And I'm totally fine with Conklin. 6K is really, really nice for a captain. Is he 6K for the captain or in general?
Yeah, it's captain 6K.
Okay, right. Yeah. So that's really nice for the captain. I'm with you. 6+ targets in 3 straight games. He's been fairly productive. Boy, if he can catch a touchdown, that would be a smash. So I like him quite a bit. I would definitely be overweight there as well. But I think my favorite captain, and it feels gross, but it might be Allen Lazard. Because in previous showdowns that we've done with the Jets, by the way, he has been like a focal point going into week 1, going into, was it week 3 against the Patriots? He was going to be owned like across the board. And in this one, I wouldn't be shocked if he's going to be owned in the flex, but in captain, he's like the 7th owned guy coming in, not even 5% owned. Like, first of all, you don't need to have an unknown captain all the time. You don't have to. Obviously, if Josh Allen comes out and gets 40 fantasy points and he's chalky, but he's in your captain, that's fine. That's awesome. You hit your captain. Now you just need to go get different, right? It's just nice to get one of these lower owned guys because if they hit, nobody has them. And then you have the other guys that are hitting probably because you have the money to go get them, right? But Lazard is not carrying ownership at under 5%. And this dude, I mean, he is a headache because he had like 3 drops last week. He was responsible for like 1 or 2 of those interceptions, but he played 100% of the snaps. Like he's out there like the entire game. He also has 10+ fantasy points in 4 of 5 games, and he and Rodgers just have a rapport. So I don't know. It could be the end of me, but Lazard's probably my favorite captain. And even if you don't love him as much as I do, I would imagine you have interest, whether it be the captain or the flex.
Yeah, I don't think he's a bad play by any means. Like the numbers you cited are pretty telling. Playing all the snaps, he's frequently a red zone target. No qualms with that. I think he's kind of pricey, 10.8 in the captain, which seems a little high, but I'm okay with it. He's not.
That's why his ownership's low, right? It's got to be why.
I assume, and I don't think he's going to project great, which generally keeps people away. So I don't think that's a bad call, but I'm pretty heavily on the Conklin bandwagon personally.
I'll probably have some Conklin for sure, and I might have him in the flex with my Lazard lineup. So we'll see what happens there. All right, kick it back over the Bills because there are some guys we should have interest in. Khalil Shakir isn't even popping on here. Is he just projected to be out at this point? Am I missing him? I don't see him.
I don't see him either.
Let me just see real-time injury report. He's officially listed as questionable with an ankle injury, non-participant in Thursday and Friday. I mean, it doesn't sound great. He did miss last
week too, right?
Yeah. So let's just, if Shakir is in at 12.9K, I think he's viable, but it's not a good matchup and he's not 100%. So I'm not like crazy interested. I'd be a lot more interested in the guys who would be stepping up if he's out. The first of which would be Keon Coleman. And then obviously Dalton Kincaid is there too. So since they are the expensive ones we'd be considering in the captain, let's just get your thoughts on them. I think personally I have a lean on Keon because he's 200K cheaper, 2K cheaper. But what do you think? You like these guys at all?
I probably would like them more if Shakir's out. As of now, I have Shakir projected in, so I'm not really getting to Keon Coleman or Dalton Kincaid or Dawson Knox for that matter. I think the one that would become more interesting is Curtis Samuel as a cheapy 4,200 in the captain, played 56% of the snaps last week with Shakir out after playing no more than 37 in any of the first 4 games. So he's someone that could play a bigger role. I think he's captainable anyway because he's so cheap. I wouldn't do that heavily by any means if Shakir is in, especially, but I think Q Sam is kind of interesting. We can just call him Q Sam. And then Matt Collins would be another one that I would have my eye on too.
Yeah, if we want to start talking about punts, no doubt. I mean, Curtis Samuel, though, 0.9 fantasy points last week with Shakir out. He has not had more than
Josh
5.2
Allen only
fantasy
completed
points.
like 9 passes the whole game. So
That's true.
He wasn't really
Yeah, but
connecting with anyone.
hey, first 3 games of the year, we thought like the Bills were just like gods amongst everybody else in this league. They're 3-0. They looked amazing. They're spreading the ball around with like, and the whole thing was like, oh, we don't need a alpha wide receiver because this is what we're doing. Look at us. We're amazing. But apparently you do because it hasn't been going very well all of a sudden. So, okay, if Shakir is out, I think you can look at Kincaid and Keon Coleman. Coleman's snaps have been up the last 2 games. Obviously, last week is because, Shakir was out. He did have a 49-yard touchdown last week, but that was his only catch on 5 targets. So it's going to be very hit or miss. Kincaid's been extremely hit or miss himself all year long. It's not a good matchup for tight ends either. But if Shakir is out, both those guys look pretty good. Like there's nothing wrong with them at all. Speaking to Curtis Samuel, if Shakir is in, I don't want Samuel at all. I think he's going to play like 30 to 40% of snaps, so like he's viable still, even if Shakir is in. But he's very risky, and judging by last week, he's risky no matter what. So I think I'm looking at him as a cheap flex option. I don't really want to captain Curtis Samuel. So cue the 30-point Curtis Samuel game for sure, right? So let's just look real quick. Who else? Big Mike Williams. 8.4K, a little bit expensive for his role in what should be a detuned passing game. Let me just pull up his card here. He has seen his snap count climb quite a bit all season long. 71% of the snaps last week was his most of the season. So his target share is not amazing. He's only had more than 4 targets once all year, but I do like the snap count. I like that ticking up, and obviously he has a scoring threat. So Mike Williams is not a bad captain option. Not going to be owned at all at 8K, 8.4K. He's not going to exactly break the bank. You're not getting like a cheap punt there, but I think he's more than viable. And then I want to get your thoughts on him, but then also the backup running backs for the Bills. If James Cook is indeed out, you have Ty Johnson and Ray Davis, both of which I'd have a good amount of interest in, with me siding towards Ray Davis because he's just really, really cheap. So what are your thoughts on those 3 guys?
Yeah, Ray Davis is someone I kind of have my eye on anyway, just because he's as cheap as he is. He may not catch more than a couple of passes out of the backfield, but for that price, I think that's okay, even with Cook in. Ty Johnson, like you said, is overpriced, especially if Cook plays. Don't have a lot of interest there. Mike Williams is okay. I'm not in love with it. Pretty boom bust. Like he's just kind of a red zone target. Doesn't get a ton of work. He's always a deep threat. Capable of scoring 3 touchdowns and completely shattering the slate. But I think I'm willing to bet against that. Just not a guy I'm getting to, especially in captain on this slate. That's
where you and I part ways, my friend. Hey, well, no, by the way, I agree on Ray Davis, but I do need Cook to be out to be enamored with him. Played 3% of snaps last week, so his snap rate has gone down like 3 or 4 weeks in a row now. Ty Johnson has been the guy they've been turning to. Obviously, if Cook is out, you would imagine that'd be kind of split between him and Ty Johnson. I think Ty Johnson at this point would be the safer option, but because he's 3,000 more, I would want to use Davis much more than I want to use Ty Johnson. We already touched on a bunch of the punts we look at. I mean, I'll just list off some other guys that would get more playing time. Obviously, MBS. You said Mac Hollins, Dawson Knox. If Tyler Conklin were out, we'd be looking at Jeremy Ruckert at 1.8K. Obviously, he would get quite a boost, and he'd be very, very appealing. So I don't think we need to dive into those guys too much. They would just absolutely all be on our radar if guys like Shakir and Conklin end up being out. So last thing we'll cover are kickers and defenses. Low game total, primetime game, so kickers just tend to go off for some reason. I'm like indifferent on the kickers. I guess I would lean towards the Bills kicker, but the kickers are not cheap. 7.5K and 6.6K in the captain. In the flex, they're a little bit more manageable at 4.4 and 5K. And for defense, I think I'm leaning towards the Jets here. What about you?
I actually kind of like the kickers, especially in captain, just to be a little different. I think Zerline would be the one I'd have a lean toward in the captain spot. For whatever reason, on these primetime games, it seems like teams can move up and down the field and then they stall out and kick a 50-yard field goal, and they're always good, and it's kind of annoying. But on this slate, with Zerline being 900 cheaper than Bass, I think he's definitely viable in the captain. Less so in the flex. I think I would kind of take a stand with the kickers in the captain spot and just hope that it's one of those games. But I have no qualms with either. And I think the Bills defense, the Jets have the more talented defense or whatever on paper, but they are facing the, in theory, worst offense in the Jets. So I think Buffalo is an okay cheap captain. Not a team I'm going to be getting a ton of in captain spot, but I think it's viable.
Yeah, I think the kickers, the price is not that far away. So I think I'm looking at Bass just because he's way more consistent. He's got the better offense. So I mean, he's had 6+ fantasy points every single game, 8+ fantasy points at 4 and 5. I just think he's safer. But zero line is in play for sure. I don't disagree. And same with the Jets Bills. Usually how I approach these situations are who's going to be less owned. That's the guy I want, probably, because they're all comparable. They're pretty close, you know. All right, so let's wrap it up with our flag plant of the night. I'll go first. It's going to be Allen Lazard in the captain. The fact that he is Allen Lazard and the fact that he's 10.8K and there's other really good options, he's just not going to be very owned. And yet he's out there on the field and he's involved. So if I can get a guy who's super being ignored by the field and he does have the ability to hit like that, I'm really interested in. That's going to be the low owned way I'm going. But if I'm going up high, I'm going to eat that Brees chalk, competitive with the field or overweight, because I think Brees Hall is going to absolutely smash in this game. I think the Jets have a decent chance of winning it with the game at home too.
Yeah, my flag plan is going to be Tyler Conklin in the captain spot. I don't think
that's
going to shock anyone. I just think he's a great price. He's got a role. They should be playing from behind, we think. So kind of lets you do whatever you want, and I think he's just going to be undervalued in captain. So assuming he plays, which is not a certainty as of now, I think Conklin is probably the best captain play on the slate.
I will say my second one behind Lazard is going to be Rodgers, just because he's not even pulling 8% ownership in the captain, which is very interesting. Obviously, they could come out and run all over them, and then that opens up things up for him, and he produces. Or like you said, if they end up getting throttled, he can still get there just by playing from behind the whole game, right? So should be an interesting one. Overall, I'll leave everybody with the fact that I am just going Jets heavy. I'm either going 4-2 Jets or 5-1 Jets here, and hoping it shakes out my way. But other advice would be to keep an eye on the injury report, monitor Shakir, James Cook, and Conklin, and just make sure you adjust as needed. All right, that is going to do it for us. Thank you for watching. If we help you at all, please give this a like and also subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.